Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Beck Rozencwajg, LaunchVic's investment manager of the Alice Anderson Fund. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on. For me, it's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to the traditional owners of the lands you're tuning in from, as well as any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. It's great to be here on the final day of the Digital Innovation Festival, and congratulations to the organising team for such a successful festival showcasing innovation in its many shapes and sizes. The purpose of this session today is to provide an overview of the Alice Anderson Fund, the $10 million sidecar fund that LaunchVic has established to co-invest in women-led early stage startups. Before I begin, I'd like to provide a brief overview of LaunchVic for those who are not familiar, although our CEO, Kate Cornick, provided a fantastic overview of LaunchVic and our 3-year strategy earlier today, and I'm sure that's a session you'll be able to access in coming days. LaunchVic is Victoria's startup agency. We were established by the Victorian government in 2016 as an independent agency responsible for growing the state's startup ecosystem. Our role is to drive the long-term success of Victoria's startup ecosystem, recognising the valuable contribution startups have on the economy through the creation of high-value jobs and gross revenue for the state. We focus on supporting programs that build founder, investor and talent capabilities, things like supporting pre-accelerator and accelerator programs that can help founders develop their product, hone their business models and connect with investors. We work to improve the startup investment landscape by developing the angel investor and early stage venture capital markets. And we also continue to drive awareness and advocacy for startups. Unlocking capital is an important part of our strategy, and in particular, catalysing early stage investments. Research conducted by Startup Genome, a world-leading innovation policy advisory and research firm, showed that Victoria's early stage capital market is underperforming compared to its peers. And in 2018, there was an estimated annual shortfall of $96 million in early stage funding. Simply put, too few startups are receiving early stage funding and therefore less likely to scale. A subsequent report commissioned by LaunchVic and conducted by globally recognised startup investor expert, Professor Josh Lerner from Harvard Business School, confirmed significant issues with the current angel investor ecosystem in Victoria. And one thing that report noted was a lack of early stage angel networks. And to that, LaunchVic have helped to recently support the establishment of 4 new early stage angel networks in Victoria. But our research has also shown that if you're a woman, you have less likelihood of receiving startup funding. We estimate that there's just over 2,000 technology startups in Victoria, and women represent just 20% of founders. Globally, 13% of founders receiving angel investment are women. And in 2017, Startup Oz found that Australian startups receiving funding, only 15% had one female founder, and only 4% were female-only founded. These statistics speak to systemic barriers affecting women's participation in the startup ecosystem, and not any lack of skill or desire to start their own business. Women receive less early stage capital than their male counterparts, both in terms of the number of deals going to women-led businesses and the amount invested in those deals. And this is likely due in part to unconscious bias in funding decisions. This data really confirmed the need for proactive measures to support women-led businesses to access more early stage capital, and led to the creation of the Alice Anderson Fund. The fund will ensure Victoria has a pipeline of women-led startups that over time will scale and boost the underrepresentation of women-led companies receiving capital. So who is Alice Anderson that the fund has been named after? And I only joined the LaunchVic team about 6 weeks ago, and I have really been enjoying learning about Alice Anderson since I started. Alice was relentlessly enterprising. She was given a car by her father when she was about 18, and that car still had a debt owing to it. And Alice managed to convince others to teach her how to maintain that car, and by 19 she'd built a thriving business in this newly emerging industry, employing an all-women crew and educating women in motor mechanics. She also established a tourism business, taking well-heeled people around Melbourne on tours into the Dandenong Ranges and as far as Tasmania. So she acquired a block of land and constructed a garage, and it was called Miss Anderson's Motor Service Enterprises. And she had a business that sold petrol, repaired cars, was a driving school, and a 24-hour chauffeur service. She was really an inventor and an advocate. She campaigned for road laws, and she also invented the get out and get under, a board with wheels to work under a car, now known as a creeper. But she couldn't get a US patent, most likely because she was female, and that is now a fixture in every mechanic's garage. Alice was really part of a generation who believed in economic and professional equality, and that is a goal that the Alice Anderson Fund looks to continue. So the Alice Anderson Fund, what are the details of the Alice Anderson Fund? So we've established a $10 million fund that co-invests in women-founded early-stage startups. The fund has an active investment period of 3 years and will provide between $50,000 and $300,000 co-investment into women-led startups. The fund has been established as a sidecar fund, co-investing alongside private sector investors, leveraging an investment at a 3-to-1 ratio. So this 3-to-1 ratio means that for every, so if a startup manages to gain $300,000 in investment from private sector investors, then the fund will invest an additional $100,000. We are seeking to invest in between 40 to 60 startups over the next few years. And in terms of the stage of investment, we're looking to invest in early stage startups, pre-seed, seed, and pre-series A. As I mentioned, our co-investment amount starts at $50,000. So that means that a startup would need to be receiving a minimum of $150,000 in investment from private sector investors. The investment is structured so that for each dollar invested by the Alice Anderson Fund, it will receive shares or considerations of 85 cents, and the startup will receive 15% of our investment as a non-dilutive grant as an incentive. So who are we looking to invest? Who are we looking to fund through the Alice Anderson Fund? Firstly, there are a number of eligibility criteria that need to be met. The first being that you need to be women-owned and led. And for that criteria, we need at least 50% ownership by one or more women prior to any investment, or a startup needs to have 30% ownership by one or more women prior to investment, and have at least one woman as in an executive position, as well as if there is a board, that board needs to be made up of at least 30% women within 100 days before and after the investment. LaunchVic has worked very closely with the Office of Women on how we are defining our definition of women-led. The startup also needs to be based in Victoria. So a startup must have at least 50% of its assets and employees located in Victoria, with the founder that meets the criteria for women-owned and led residing in Victoria as well. And lastly, startups need to meet LaunchVic's definition of a startup, which is a young technology-based business that uses innovation to scale rapidly and capture global markets. And startups also need to adhere to Victorian government policy on ESG prohibited activities. So we will not be investing in startups that are involved with things like tobacco, gambling, or uranium mining. In terms of the application process, a startup needs to be raising capital and have connected to third-party private investors, for example, angel groups, early stage VCs, private investors who agree to fund the startup. Both Victorian, interstate and international investors are all eligible to apply. The application to the Alice Anderson Fund needs to come from one of these investors who apply on behalf of the founder. And that investor must either hold a sophisticated investor certificate, must be independent from the startup, and the experience of that investor is what is assessed and approved by our investment committee. So the application needs to come from the investor. The Alice Fund will invest directly in the startup. We have a fabulous investment committee who have been appointed to review and approve applications, chaired by Susan Oliver, who was Scale Investors Chair and founding member. We have prominent angel investor Matt Allen of Tractor Ventures, Kerry Lee Sinclair, Chair of SBE Australia, Anitha De Silva, who is LaunchVic board member, and also Kate Cornick, our CEO. The investment committee has been appointed to assess the investor applications, and they will really be looking not at the soundness or commercial viability of the individual startup investment, but rather they're using their best judgment to assess the quality of the investor and the deal provided. The IC assess applications at a monthly meeting. The dates for these meetings are on our website, and we ask for applications to be in 10 days prior to the investment committee meetings, and we are aiming to inform applicants of an outcome within 48 hours following the investment committee meeting. So we're very mindful of the speed that is often required for these investment decisions, and looking to meet, looking to be quick with our responses. I'm really excited to be involved with such a proactive opportunity to help correct the amount of investment in early stage female startups. And I'm really excited about getting the women, the female founders that we will be investing in together, and providing value as an investor to these businesses through networks and mentoring opportunities. The fund opened on the 1st of July. And we hope to have some good news shortly on our first investments. The investment phase is up to 3 years, and I really look forward to seeing more applications coming in. I will open it up now to any questions that anybody has in relation to the fund. I believe we need to put those questions in the Q&A chat rather than the general chat. So just having a look at those. And now I've got a question from Marie. Does the Alice Anderson Fund accept a female founder who is just starting out? I have ladies product, which I'm currently sourcing mentorship and funding at a loss. So basically, the Alice Anderson Fund is very much looking to fund startups that are seeking pre-seed and seed and pre-Series A funding. So these are very early stage, might be pre-revenue startups. We are looking for those companies to have received investment from private sector investors, and that minimum investment amount needs to be $150,000 before the Alice Fund will co-contribute. But we are definitely open to those early stage opportunities. In terms of, got another question here about a deadline for applying for the fund. The investment period, so the the fund just opened on the 1st of July, and we're looking to have a approximately 3-year investment period. So we don't have a deadline as yet. We do have $10 million in funding to work with, but we're looking to make investments over the next 3 years. Melissa has asked whether the fund is industry agnostic. It certainly is. Yeah, we're completely industry agnostic, looking for a wide range of opportunities to invest in. A couple of other questions that have come to me frequently are in regards to if companies have not been able to find investors as yet, where can they go to find them? We do have our Finding Startups link on the LaunchVic website. I think findingsstartups.org.com.au. That is run by LaunchVic and is a Finding Startups is where you can go, where there's a lot of investors listed, and you might be able to find lists of angel groups and investors there that might help you in getting started in your investment. Melissa has asked, what type of criteria do we show? So, as I mentioned, the investments, the application needs to be made by an investor on behalf of a founder. As part of that, the investor will need to provide information on the investor, on the startup, and on the actual investment opportunity that is at hand, including providing their due diligence that they've done on the startup opportunity. They need to provide cap table and also a term sheet that has been already negotiated with the startup as some of the criteria that are required as per the application. We have another question. Would one female co-founder plus one male co-founder in Victoria qualify? As long as the criteria around either the 50% of female ownership or 30% female ownership with a female in an executive position and the 30% of board members also being female, then they will qualify. The founder that qualifies as women-led does need to be Victorian based. Have another question around how long the application process takes. So as I mentioned, the investment committee are meeting monthly, and assessments are made prior to those investment committee meetings. We're asking for applications to be in 10 days prior to the investment committee meeting, and an outcome is expected 48 hours post the investment committee meeting, subject to a legal review of term sheets. We have another question from Stephen, which is, can the 150,000 investment be in kind? That's a great question, Stephen. The co-investment amount, it does need to be a cash amount that we're co-investing with, so it cannot be in kind, it cannot be contra, it cannot be a grant. It does need to be a monetary investment from a co-investor. Okay, there's a couple of other questions in the chat. So can a startup be from overseas or branch in Victoria be eligible for the fund? So the startup does need to be Victorian based. So both the female founder and the actual startup needs to be Victorian based, so needs to have 50% of assets based in Victoria. So Melissa has also asked, is there criteria on who the investors are? So the investors it can be an individual investor, it can be a member of an angel group, In terms of criteria on who the investors are, they do need to be a sophisticated investor, so have a sophisticated investor certificate or have an AFSL license. But that is, but you know, you can be an individual investor and apply. The investor will be assessed by the investment committee on their background in early stage investments. So they will be looking for evidence that that investors have been involved with early stage investments previously and have negotiated. We really are trying to ensure that we lift the that term sheets that are negotiated are very founder friendly, both founder and investment friendly, but best practice term sheets. So while there's no criteria, there's no strict criteria on who the investors are, the investment committee are looking for previous investor experience and knowledge of best practice when it comes to early stage investing. We have another question from Marie. Being an early stage startup, is there a prerequisite to already be a registered business receiving revenue with the ABN set up? Yes, we definitely need, companies need to be established with an ABN registered business with their operations based in Victoria. So yeah, there is a need for the business to be established. I probably would point you in the direction of some of the pre-accelerator programs that LaunchVic also support. Those pre-accelerator programs will really help those early stage startups in establishing themselves and getting business models ready for investment. Another question as to whether international investors are allowed. They certainly are. Investors can be Victorian based, can be based interstate, or can be based internationally. There's a question from Lisa. Once granted, I believe LaunchVic will hold a maximum 25% stake of a funding round. Is this negotiable, and can this be a shared stake with the angel investor? So as I mentioned, we are looking to co-invest at a 3-to-1 ratio with private sector investors. And we will invest between 50,000 and 300,000 in that co-investment. Generally speaking, we're looking to increase the size of rounds that female investors are receiving. There is probably some negotiation involved if that full co-investment amount is not required, but we are generally looking to hold that 3-to-1 ratio. If there's further questions that you have following this session that you'd like to understand in more detail, feel free to contact me at investments@launchvic.org. We'll collate the answers to these questions and others and be continuing to update our frequently asked questions on the LaunchVic website. So continue to check there and there will be more information provided. And here is just some more information in terms of how you can connect with investors through findingstartups.launchvic.org. Looks like that might be the end of the questions. I will stay online here in case there's any other further questions that you have. I really look forward to those of you that are founders and investors, for investors to be putting in applications through the Alice Fund and to be working with female-led, women-led founders who are looking to apply for the Alice Fund as well. Okay, there doesn't seem to be any more questions, so we might wrap it up. Feel free to contact me at investments@launchvic.org if you've got any further questions. And I really thank you for everybody that came along today and look forward to seeing applications come through to the Alice Anderson Fund.